just general crowd noise. You can use it.
And I feel sorry for you and your lack of soul.
Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, welcome to Circus Bazaar magazine, penned from the crooked timber of humanity. Dear audience, some of us would say freedom of speech is important. Some would say it's even a right. But people, what is equally important is the freedom to listen. And if you listen carefully, you may just hear it. What you hear is a man we call the Great Whistler. Yes, the Great Whistler. A man who has dismantled lies and corruption at the highest levels of international organisation, the instigator of the largest global anti-corruption investigation in history, the critically acclaimed author and creator of the international best-selling book and Hollywood blockbuster film Backstabbing for Beginners, the Dane, the Frenchman, the American, the screenwriter and producer, the great questioner at the heart of the Circus Bazaar magazine article, Who is the Leader of the Free World? Allow us to introduce to you, on behalf of Circus Bazaar magazine, edition 2, It Tolls for Thee, the Whistler, Michael Soussan. Enjoy the show.
Okay, Michael, here we are, man. After all this time of discussions.
I see you brought some wine.
Yeah, this is a replica Roman legion wine vessel made by archaeologists that duplicated it from one he dug up in Rome.
Oh, wow.
With Roman legion cups.
So that's how they won all those wars.
Stamps on the back. So you actually are the first person to be on this podcast with my new setup, all right? So it's been a bit of stress and hard work to get it.
Well, in vino veritas, as they say in Latin, I guess it is. The truth comes out with wine.
Yeah.
But perhaps after.
Okay. So look, this podcast is going to be really cool. So I think the first thing is you just introduce who you are to me and the audience.
My name is Michael Soussan, and I guess I've been wearing several hats over the years. I've worked at CNN, I've worked at the United Nations, I've worked on K Street in Washington, D.C. I have written for a number of publications, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, and so on. And I have written a book about my experience at the UN, which was rather unusual in some ways, and rather too usual in some others. But it ended with a big clash of major interest groups in the world that created a scandal that I pushed along a little bit. And that book was then made into a movie, which starred Ben Kingsley and Theo James, and is now on HBO, called Backstabbing for Beginners, which reflects the world of saints that portend to save the world and bring peace to incredibly complex war zones, and they can hardly get along with each other inside their office cubicles. So, that's obviously, we initially pitched it as The Office meets Syriana, and it became a much more serious film than that, but the book is a satirical review of that world now.
But how did you originally become involved with the UN?
Well, actually, I was trying to leave a job at my first, my father wanted me to become an international lawyer. And so I went and worked for a law firm in order to get into law school.
You studied politics at Brown University, right?
That's right. So I had, by then I had studied, majored in international relations at Brown University and with a master's from Paris, Sciences Po in Paris.
But another fact about you was that you established the Brown Journal of Politics. What's it called?
It's the Brown Journal of World Affairs.
Okay.
I think with the Harvard International Review, it's probably the most recognized university journals on international relations, world affairs, however you would call it. And yeah, I'm very proud of it. It's been running for since I left.
But where were you born?
I was born in Denmark, of a French father and a Danish mother. So we grew up in France. And then I went for university, of course, to Providence, Rhode Island, which is where Brown University is located. And I, from there, I went to New York and started working. And, once you're in the U.S. and things are actually moving, you tend to stay there.
You're an American citizen. Yeah.
I became an American citizen, I think, shortly after Biden won the election. Yeah.
Okay. But you're French, Danish, American.
I'm a francophone culture.
Okay.
That's for sure. But I'm not a French citizen.
All right.
And I'm a Danish and American citizen. Yeah.
Okay. So how did you end up with your job at the UN?
Well, a friend called me. I was looking for a job. I think I almost got a job at the World Bank. By that time, I was sending out CVs left and right just to get out of this law firm. And frankly, I needed to pay rent, so I needed something. A friend called me, and he had just gotten a job offer in the Clinton administration. And before that, he had gotten that job at the UN. So they needed someone yesterday. And they were building what was to become the largest humanitarian program in UN history, in terms of money-wise, at least. It involved Iraq, which was under sanctions at the time. And it was called the Oil for Food program, and it was being built at a pace that was unusual for the UN. They had to build it up very rapidly because the needs were extremely dire.
So essentially, the UN had to administer a huge country.
Yeah, and that is a very complicated task in and of itself. But they suddenly had to take over the spending to provide for the humanitarian needs of an entire population. I think the reason I was hired was that I was not an American citizen, and yet I was trained to write English, which is, believe it or not, a rare skill at the UN. You would think that diplomats are good at writing, but it's not necessarily the case. That's why I was hired. I think they just needed someone with a U.S. sort of a kind of experience, and who was not a U.S. citizen, because U.S. citizens were not allowed to fly to Iraq.
Okay, but what was your specific role there?
I was a program coordinator, oftentimes an acting spokesman. So my job really was to help the director and the Undersecretary General oversee the work of 9 UN agencies in spending about 4 to 10, depending on the price of oil, $1 billion a year, helping the Iraqi people. So that means, not only food, but medicines, hospital equipment. The electric grid was completely destroyed in the first Gulf War. So I learned a lot about many aspects of the human condition. It was basically, we had an overview of the entire UN system from where we were. And then, of course, we traveled to Iraq and met with that despicable regime that was in place back then. But also, very interestingly, with the Kurdish factions at the time, who were just beginning to build up what is now a much more modern northern Iraqi Kurdistan.
And at what point in your job there did you sort of get a feeling that things weren't right?
Well, it's a question I've gotten a lot, and there were many points, but it didn't take long. It was a few weeks before. It was not even in my job interview, I asked a few questions, and it was quite clear that there was not only smuggling going on, but kickbacks to the regime, and profits being skimmed off the contracts by what ended up being 2,300 international companies. That's what the Volker report found, at least when it was investigated at my suggestion.
Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, I hope you are enjoying this podcast. We just wanted to remind you that Circus Bazaar magazine is entirely self-funded and a wholly independent publication. We have no large investors or corporate backing. We don't even take government support. We would like to believe that the only true way to remain independent is to actually be independent. But at the end of the day, that is not only impossible, but it's also undesirable. For without you, the audience, we are performing to nothing. Just an ether of empty space with no life, no colour or purpose. So we do in fact survive on the goodwill and support of those whom we are dedicated to perform. You. That is why we decided to, in part, move away from the digital space and all its overzealous corporate control and manipulation and produce something real, honest and tangible. Something that can't be taken away at the push of a button. Something that you can hold in your hand that has a sense of unalterable permanency. Circus Bazaar magazine is the best of which we have to offer, and in many ways our gift to freedom of speech, of which we will always remain dedicated. Our promise to you is that we will never compromise our principles of diverse viewpoints and fearless critique of the human realm, of which we both know as a circus. So in turn, if you appreciate our work and feel like we make a contribution to independent free media, then please head over to Circus Bazaar and subscribe to the print edition of the magazine. All details can be found in the description section. Thank you for listening to the Big Tent Podcast, brought to you by Circus Bazaar magazine, penned from the crooked timber of humanity. Keep enjoying the show.
And so when you made a decision inside yourself that you would go public about some of what you saw there, at what point was that?
It was after the war. I had almost returned to the UN to work for Sergio de Mello. And the woman who I was going to replace, unfortunately, and Sergio himself, died in an attack by Al-Qaeda that targeted our UN building. But several strange things had been happening, meaning the judge that was investigating fraud in the oil for food case blew up in a car bomb in Iraq. So there was basically a list that was circulating which was Saddam's private list of everybody he was bribing and everybody he was receiving bribes from. And there were so many important names on that list that I thought it was impossible for the UN to look the other way and not investigate this, because I think it would reflect incredibly bad on the UN itself, for one. So I tried to give them the advice directly, but what happened was that they thought it would just blow over. Having been in Washington, I knew the word from there was, it's not going to blow over, it's going to play into the political campaign at the time. And that's when you know a scandal has wind in its sails. So I wrote an op-ed calling for an independent investigation, and things snowballed from there.
Who published that?
The Wall Street Journal. And about a week or so after, Kofi Annan appointed the former head of the Federal Reserve Paul Volcker, who's an incredibly experienced man with investigations, to come and have to be his main chief sort of independent investigator. Well, he walked into the Security Council and he looked at that file, and he was very skeptical that they would ever vote to approve that. So he asked them, are you sure you want me to investigate this? Because to him, I mean, I saw him just open the file and close it again. He saw exactly what was happening. And the corruption was not new to those of us who worked in the program, nor even to the journalists that covered it. It's just that it was not really talked about. And so we all knew what was going on. And in a very unusual vote, the Security Council approved an investigation. It all happened very fast. They were working without instructions from their home government, many of them, because the Oil for Food program in Iraq in general was overseen by the intelligence agencies, not only the State Department or the foreign ministries. And therefore, they didn't have clear instructions. So everybody was like, yay, transparency. But clearly, what happened was that they voted for, they thought it was just this man. And he said, okay, well, if I'm going to do it, I need, $30 million and 15 experienced investigators from the FBI, Scotland Yard, etc. And so it actually became the largest anti-corruption investigation on a global scale that I know about in history. And I don't think it'll happen again.
Just so people know, Paul Volcker, he's famous for destroying the inflation in the 70s by lifting interest rates really high. So he's got the credibility that's like, we're a politically independent branch of the government, the Federal Reserve and whatnot, and we'll do it despite the political ramifications. So that's what led to credibility to be able to do this investigation.
I mean, he stood up to Ronald Reagan at the height of Reagan's popularity. He said, I do what I want, not what you want.
Just on a total tangent, wouldn't it be nice to have a Paul Volcker for people that aren't in the housing market today to like, so anyway, just on a
he can fix a lot of things, but I don't know if he was old then, so I don't know.
Yeah. But the way you come out with this, writing an op-ed and giving it to the Wall Street Journal, is slightly different to sort of other very, very well-known whistleblowers in recent times, like Edward Snowden or Chelsea Manning.
Well, they came a bit later, yeah.
Yeah, but the environment has entirely changed since then. I mean, look at these people, and then look at you.
Yeah, no, it's whistleblowing has become cool, but I get contacted by
you're a dead man.
Well, I shot myself in the foot in terms of a career at the UN, but I had already decided that I wasn't going to go back. They had failed to protect their own headquarters. They had actually asked Marines to go away from their headquarters, and that was in order to not be associated with the occupying power. And for that reason, the road was clear for a huge truck with 1,000, pounds of TNT to go right into the building, right under the office of Sergio de Mello.
I remember.
Yeah, it was a catastrophic explosion. The head of the driver of the truck was found like a kilometer away or something.
I remember.
He was a Tunisian recruit of Al-Qaeda. And
So how has actually doing that and looking at how other whistleblowers have fared, how's it affected the trajectory of your life and, I guess, secondly, your career?
Well, whistleblowing it has affected it because the option of going back to what I had been involved in an official bureaucracy was no longer an option. And at the same time, I was surviving at the time, teaching at New York University, the Center for Global Affairs. I was teaching international relations, and I was teaching writing, and I was reporting as well for various publications. And so, but I was still sort of, bothered by thinly veiled, Russian spies, and having your apartment broken into, and people trying to figure out who do you really work for. And the truth is, I started as a complete amateur.
Do you think that whistleblowing on everyone has a protective effect as opposed to whistleblowing on one nation? Is it better to be wanted by everybody than one?
Yeah, because all sides were pitted against each other in a sense. And people were asking me, when I was asked to come and testify in Congress, they were like, well, do you have a lawyer, and things like that. And I was like, well, why would I need a lawyer? Well, because there's gonna be opposition research against you and this and that. And it's true, there was. I was contacted by journalists.
So if you, looking back now, given the way your life's panned out, if you had the opportunity to do this again, would you do it again?
I wouldn't have a choice. I didn't see it as a choice at the time. I thought that when that piece of evidence came out, there was every reason to figure out whether it was true, and then establish the historical record. It had been our job all along to oversee this program, not to have an oversight that, like, where you don't see things. The word oversight can be used in both ways. But no, our role was to oversee what was going on. We had been paid all over about $1 billion for this. This came out of taxpayer, money, and of course Iraqi oil resources. This was not our money. So the UN had been living large, revamping its offices and everything, and I felt guilty, quite simply, that we hadn't been the ones to alert, because the result of the corruption, to be clear, was really that people who were hungry went by with horrible quality food, because the middlemen were skimming most of the money that it cost to buy it. So the quality of the food, the medicines were expired, which means people could be taking the wrong pills. People suffering from serious diseases could not be treated. And of course, the regime could brush their teeth with Evian or Perrier if they wanted to, but the rest of the country needed water and sanitation that worked. And all of these sectors were deeply. I saw, children in hospitals that were on the verge of death and could not be helped. And I did not find that acceptable. And so the idea was always to make the program work better, and I thought that was a question of our competence. And so I worked a lot for 3 years to get things to work better, at the working level, really sort of going around and trying to fix things, which was a bit of a whack-a-mole game, to be honest. But I thought that I didn't think I had a choice. I didn't hesitate. So I don't know whether I would do it again. It's probably not the smart career move. But at the same time, once the scandal that I knew would broke anyway, I didn't find that it would be a great thing on my CV to have worked for it if I had been one of the silent ones. So it's kind of a defining moment that I can't take that back now. But being called a whistleblower is annoying. being tagged as a whistleblower is annoying, even when you go for other jobs, because who wants to hire a whistleblower? So I don't define myself by that act. I would do it again, but it was exceptional circumstances.
You know, talking of chairmen of the U.S. Federal Reserve, I read Alan Greenspan's book years ago, and I mean, I had a chapter on corruption, I think, or maybe I watched him interviewed or something. But he said that corruption's a problem when it becomes the fundamental dynamic of any institution or country, and that there was corruption within U.S. institutions, but it wasn't the primary dynamic. So at what point?
Well, I would disagree with him on that. I think it has become today the primary dynamic in U.S. politics are corrupt.
But when you're dealing with a country like Iraq, it's a corrupt country, like clearly. But at what point does like systemic corruption that just exists as part of the general day-to-day political background turn into something that it's a whistleblower thing?
Yeah, I'm not a moralist when it comes to corruption. I think that remember, in the Bible, in Genesis, it's literally the first act that Adam does proactively. Of course, he blames Eve, who blames the snake, but he goes and eats that apple. And we don't even know in Genesis why that apple was the forbidden fruit. But it was forbidden. There was a law that forbid him to eat the apple. And first thing that happens in the story of humanity, as it is told to us in the founding book of our Western civilization, is of course that someone breaks the rule and pays the consequence in this case, and gets kicked out of heaven. So corruption is in human nature, I think, is what I take away from that story. And so sometimes we need to be careful because the temptation to make an extra buck or an extra $1 million is something that a lot of people can fall for, and corruption exists in many realms. In fact, all of the corruption that was uncovered under the Oil for Food program still goes on today in our, especially in trade with non-democratic countries, but also in trade between democratic countries, but especially in trade with non-democratic countries, because you've got to pay 10% to 20% to the leader and his account in Switzerland or the Cayman Islands or whatever it is. And so a lot of companies have asked me to come and speak to them about the issue of corruption. And sometimes it's a little bit embarrassing for me because I understand that to do business and even sometimes to do humanitarian work in some places, war zones, you got to pay the warlord. And it's a horrible reality that none of us, we would prefer it not to be like that. But one deals with corruption. What I believe is, though, that it's not because it's there that you have to necessarily close your eyes to it or not report it. I think our laws are a little bit hypocritical. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the U.S. and I think the equivalent at the European level forbids our companies from making corrupt payments in their international dealings. And that's why a lot of these companies, 2,300 companies and people, those that were based in democratic countries got huge fines. But none of this money went back to Iraq, from which the money was actually stolen, if you think about it. I think that we have to take it into account. I think that, for example, today in Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky is forced to fire people that were very close to him in government. Recently, the Minister of Defense, but before that, I think his big backer for his presidential run was an oligarch in Ukraine, perhaps a well-meaning oligarch, but he's also having to face justice today because Zelensky is a person who understands that the future of his country depends on how good he is at fighting corruption while he's fighting the Russians. Because before his election, Ukraine wasn't a problem for Putin because he could just corrupt whatever government was in place. Or if not the head of government, then all of his ministers, or one way or another get his way. So it was controllable. So corruption is freedom's dragon. True freedom cannot be achieved in a society that is too corrupt. And so we got to be aware of it. There are limits to how much corruption we should tolerate, as free people.
So for the next edition of my magazine, or Circus Bazaar magazine, for the next edition of Circus Bazaar magazine, you've penned a great article on the topic of Ukraine called "Who is the Leader of the Free World?", where you challenge the reader to look at where the beacon of the values of freedom are, I guess, shining the brightest at the moment. And you chose to sort of surround this around Zelensky. Tell us more about that. What made you the decision to write that article?
Well, part of it was the nature of the magazine. I think it was really an honor to be invited to write for Circus Bazaar.
Thank you.
I think that it's a magazine that does not shy away from asking provocative questions. And I knew that there was a question that I could not credibly get into certain magazines that are so establishment that they forget to think out loud sometimes. But yes, I wanted to ask the question, which may sound provocative, but the question of who is the leader of the free world today. And that, normally one would say, okay, well, the U.S. president, of course, is the leader of the free world because America is the largest, most powerful democracy on earth. Its economy is the largest on earth, and it can project more military power than any other democracy, any other single democracy. And so naturally, the person sitting in the Oval Office is the leader of the free world. Well, leadership doesn't work by sitting in an office necessarily. So it's about what people do with their power. It's about what they say. It's about what initiatives they take. And sometimes events make the leader. America took the lead in two post 9/11 wars that were rationalized in part as an effort to spread democracy. And I think eventually in Iraq it will succeed down the road, but it'll be the Iraqis that build it.
But it was the Americans that shifted the arrow slightly upwards and gave it the correct trajectory, like the Paul Friedman argument.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. But something dramatic happened when the U.S. invaded Iraq, which was that they had no plan in place for how to govern it in the transition period to ensure a democracy. They had no plan to keep Iran from interfering very, very actively with the process of nation building. They had no plan to stop the smuggling of suicide bombers through Syria at the time, which caused havoc in Baghdad and pitted Sunnis against Shias and forced the Kurds to think on their own. And it was a very divisive. Neighbors of Iraq were extremely worried about a successful democratic Iraq. Because if that country was the first Arab democracy to succeed, then their own regimes wouldn't hold. And in fact, we've seen, even with Iraq having a lot of trouble still, that there has been several attempts at major protests. Some would call them revolutionary in their spirit. In Iran, there are two waves. There's been the Arab Spring. Things are changing. But of course,
so you believe in domino theory?
No, I believe in the fact that democracy is viral.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that there's an automatic effect, because that's sort of, that's the Cold War theory, that where we looked at the world as a sort of a chessboard, or if one country falls to communism, then the one next door is more likely to fall to communism. I think it wasn't entirely wrong. The spread of communism was made easier by countries next door becoming communist. The struggle is not between communism and capitalism. The Chinese have showed us that you can perfectly well be a capitalist society in all but name, and be a tyranny or a totalitarian regime, which it used to be. Now it's a one-man tyranny in essence.
You know, China's the fastest growing Christian nation in the world.
No, I did not know.
Yeah, I just think it's kind of interesting, because you wonder whether or not the success of capitalism is riding on the back of Christian expansionism in China. That's just like a thought. It's kind of interesting. It's
interesting. I mean, I think the Chinese in general are seen throughout Asia, and now in Africa as well, and in South America, and even within the U.S. economy, is extremely enterprising.
Yeah, totally.
People, and for them, they're able to work through family banking systems that are much more efficient. They get loans from their uncle, then they have to work 10 years for their uncle, and then so on. And then they get their own shop. So one doesn't want to sort of be afraid of the people.
Yeah.
But what I think we need to be aware of is that democracy is something that is only occurs when it's hard fought for. And the expansion of democracy has been bloody. It was starting with the American Revolution, the French Revolution. They both led to further wars within American society. The Civil War caused more American casualties, including deaths, than all other American wars combined. And that was also a war for democracy, because slavery was fundamentally undemocratic. And so I think that if the North had lost the Civil War, for example, the course of history would have changed, because they would have found a great ally in Nazi Germany, who also believed that they had a superior race, and that therefore they could treat what they thought were inferior races as they wished. Well, if they had been superior, they would have maybe gotten the atomic bomb first. But they got close, and some of their scientists were the ones working in the United States. So we have to be very careful to understand what we mean by the spread of democracy. It's not a painless process.
Did you watch Oppenheimer?
The latest film,
yeah.
No, but I've read a lot about Oppenheimer, and certainly I understand all the dilemmas that he.
Yeah, right. There's a few things in it that kind of like didn't seem right, and I thought, like the director of the film, I know he's a famous director and everything, but I thought he's not a physicist or doesn't understand the history of the era in relation to that. But of course, I Googled it more, and it turned out that he was correct about a whole bunch of facts. For instance, I think we're going to have to edit this out because I can't remember the guy's name.
But what was he correct about?
Well, there's this clip in it where is it Niels Bohr?
Niels Bohr, the Danish physicist, had a big role to play in.
But he's sitting in a car behind a windscreen. No, it's Richard Feynman. It's not Niels Bohr. Sorry, I couldn't remember his name. But he's sitting in the car looking at Trinity explode for the first time, and someone comes up to him and offers him goggles, and he replies back. He goes, "Oh, don't worry, UV rays can't penetrate the glass." And I thought, Richard Feynman is famous for making all these incredibly witty comments, right? He's like a really great thinker.
Was he joking or was he?
Well, I just don't understand it. Okay. But I looked at it. I thought, what type of scriptwriter would write that into a film? Because it just didn't make any sense. And but it turns out, like, I googled it, and apparently it's true. Okay. I don't know. It was just seemed out of place.
I mean, they're the physicists, right?
Well, yeah.
I studied international relations. UV rays can do what they want.
Boy, it's not just UV rays. I read this book about
radiation,
Hiroshima, and it was talking about photographic film or photographic paper that was buried like 3 stories underground, or a story underground in Hiroshima, got developed by the blast.
Oh,
so
wow,
it's not just UV rays, it's gamma rays and all sorts of shit penetrates all sorts of...
Well, gamma rays make the Hulk, so we've got to be careful with those.
We do. Okay, cool. We don't have to edit it out because I remembered his name. But we've had a lot of chats about this, but geopolitically, I'm trying to figure out where your inner pole stands with regards to the Ukrainian conflict. Like, so where do you stand? How do you feel about it? Because there's a lot of question marks, and that's going to be explored throughout these series of interviews I do with all these different thinkers. Not all of them have the same opinions as you. It's very diverse. Where does the US and the Western liberal order hold some level of culpability to what's happened there? How do you see liberal expansion versus Russian expansionism, the moving eastward of NATO? Where do you stand? How do you feel about it all?
I have pretty simple feelings. I think that there's democracy and freedom on the one hand, and there's autocracy and corruption on the other. So the expansion of NATO is, of course, even Putin used to want to be part of NATO, okay? And then he realized that the US was not that interested in Russia joining NATO, because then they would start having to run every decision past them. So then he, of course, I think his issue with NATO is genuine. And I think Ukraine's desire to join NATO is equally genuine. The only difference is that Ukraine's desire to join NATO and the EU is the population's will, is the people's will. It's not our will. We have just said that, we would perhaps welcome that. We don't want to keep them out. There's nothing un-European about Ukraine. There's nothing not worth defending if a free people. NATO is composed, the very idea of NATO is that every country should, in fact, be a democracy. That's where we run into trouble when democracies backslide into more autocratic regimes. A lot of people in Turkey don't really trust the outcomes of the election there. People in Hungary currently are worried about the state of their democracy. But so where is it our fault that there is war in Ukraine? No, it is the fault of the person who ordered the attack on that country, which was a plan to completely occupy that country, change the government, and with people that had like the Wagner Group mercenaries SS tattoos on their own necks, they were calling the other side fascists. I mean, there's a limit to how many lies one can swallow, but who wants to live under a regime that invents fascists and Nazis when, in fact, it's a democratically elected former comedian who was leading Ukraine at the time? Okay, he didn't bow to Putin's wishes and pressure, but I think that he bears responsibility for the war in Ukraine. Putin does, and it's as simple as that.
As much as this is true, and you're a U.S. citizen, as much as this is a
recent U.S. citizen,
well, yeah, let's say,
but yeah, I'm a Westerner.
I don't think it's. I mean, I think what we're seeing in Ukraine is a total disaster. But I mean, look at U.S. politics. How do you feel about the clusterfuck that U.S. politics has become?
Well, that's in part why I wrote "Who's the Leader of the Free World," because everybody wants to take their photo with or the selfies with Zelensky, and in a way, Western leaders need their photo taken with him more than he does with them. He just needs our weapons. He doesn't necessarily need all these photo ops, but he understands that they are necessary. He's a savvy media personality before he got into politics. But yeah, I think you called it a clusterfuck, and it's the right word for what is happening today in the American democratic system, because everything that used to be the hallmarks of American democracy, the unique hallmarks of American democracy, meaning the two-party system, the electoral college, the way votes are counted and reported, and etc. All of these elements are now not trusted anymore. We also have the two-party system has revealed its weakness, and that is that if one party has a radical base strong enough to put a radical contender into the front seat, then and when I say radical, I mean we're speaking about someone who does not believe in democracy, who was not willing to relinquish power after having lost an election by a total of 6 million votes, by the way. And that's double what Hillary had won by in the total count. But this electoral college system is driving everybody mad because the rest of the world does not know where America will stand in a year. And in the Ukrainian conflict, the notion that a Trump presidency could, like in a Rocky II effect, have a comeback, means that the man who was impeached for pressuring Ukraine to come up with trumped-up charges against his opponent's son, and held up arms shipments and made good friends with Putin, called him a genius or a great guy or however many. He only had good words for the Russian tyrant. And the very idea that the White House could be occupied once more by a man like that has the world very worried, and has Ukrainians very worried. And frankly, that office, until it is, America's great power was its ability to always, renew itself. But the avenues for renewal have been challenged. Immigration has become an issue. Nobody can move, there's a lot of pent up racism that we've seen boil up suddenly as soon as they found a voice that represented it. This notion that there's a lot of good people on both sides when fascists are protesting against Antifa, which stands for anti-fascists. Sorry, I'm with the anti-fascists if it's going to come down to a street fight. And I think anybody who believes in freedom and democracy and in the values that America was founded on should be against fascism, should be against tyrants. Now, that doesn't mean that we can go to war every time we don't like somebody, especially not with a nuclear power. But that's not the only reason one should not go to war. I think one should only go to war when absolutely necessary for the defense of one's country. I think that's where things got a little confused in the post 9/11 environment in America. Fear does not work in favor of democracies. It works against it. Fear is how tyrants rule.
In the article, you gave a rundown of the last 5 or 6 U.S. presidents, and but you never sort of said who's your favorite.
Oh, like am I a Democrat or a Republican? I didn't. I'm not registered. I will of course vote in the next elections. What has everybody confused is that I'm sorry to say it, but since Biden's inner circle and advisors are not saying it to him, there is a problem. He's not letting competition within his own party. He's not allowing for new leadership to emerge by running a second time. It's not because you can run a second time that you should run a second time. I was very glad that a professional like him was able to go into this to the arena and beat Trump, because Biden knows how to run an election. But he wasn't necessarily my favorite Democratic candidate. But if tomorrow I think a better person in the Republican Party emerges, I would vote for that person. I would have voted for Abraham Lincoln, who was a Republican, and I think that these things change.
A very smart and wise person that also contributed to the magazine said to me the other day that he was very happy with Biden because he believed that his mind was stuck in the Cold War. And so he had a very strong natural aversion to escalation of the war and nuclear weaponry and everything like that. And I think we can, I think I'll discuss more of this with him. He'll do this podcast as well. But yeah, where do you think Biden stands relative to Ukraine? What do you think is going to happen? I saw the other day that they're supplying more very, very controversial uranium enriched weapons to Ukraine. I mean, at what point does the US become as bad as Russia?
Yeah, I think the uranium enriched.
Well, this is something that this happened in Iraq as well.
Yeah, they used them in Iraq, and there has been some speculation about them causing Gulf War syndrome, but war causes a lot of post-war, syndromes, and syndromes are by definitions diseases we cannot really name or define or understand. But uranium-tipped bombshells are very much part of the U.S. arsenal, very much part of what is used in warfare. I'm not saying they or cluster bombs or phosphorus aren't horrible weapons that kill or can penetrate armor or can kill more people than you may want to target. Ideally, they are. They can create horrible.
I guess it's embarking on an alternative route of escalation at the infantry level.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got a country that is being bombarded by what used to be one of the largest superpowers on Earth, and every day their civilians are being blown to bits. And if they don't die in a bomb explosion, some have died of cold, some have died of being left behind in a village, flooded or without electricity. Or, I mean, this attack on Ukraine, there is no justification for it. And so, in fighting a war, once you're fighting a war, there's only two outcomes: you win, or you make peace. With a credible party on the other side. And I think what Zelensky's judgment is that Putin will not respect any agreement. And he cited that the agreement that was supposedly made between Putin and Prigozhin after that Wagner Group mafioso rebelled, if he can't be trusted with his most trusted advisor, why should Ukraine trust any deal they make with Russia? So what they want to do is create a reality on the ground that they can defend. And after that, well, they know there's going to be provocations from Russia, and they know there's going to be continuous, maybe terrorism, maybe other forms of destabilizing moves. They know it. And so Zelensky has said that the future of Ukraine may look a little bit more like that of Israel than like that of a normal European country. And for that reason, I think more and more people in Western Europe, particularly in the Baltic states and very much in Scandinavia, are saying that NATO membership, they've certainly deserved it if peace can be achieved. The problem is we cannot decide how to achieve peace at the moment. The only path towards it is on the ground.
Would you consider yourself a Wilsonian ideologue of sorts? I mean, you reference in the article John McCain and his want to create a League of Democracies.
Yeah, so Wilson, the war that the president that led America into World War I, which was a war America really wanted to stay out of, but finally joined on the side of the other two main democracies in Europe at the time. I believe that Wilson was inspired by the writings of Immanuel Kant, and I think that who wrote on perpetual peace, and in that document also enlightened us to the fact that perpetual peace could not be achieved until the entire world was composed of democracies. Now we are forced to say to say those words with a smile because we're far from there. But democracy has at times been has been progressing, and it's true that there has never really been a serious war between two democracies.
But what if the whole world was democracies?
Well, then the UN would work.
Then we'd have to go to war with democracies.
Well, if there's nobody to go to war with, I think that there's many companies in the military-industrial complex that might have to convert to some other form of procurement gigs. But
I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, do you think we're there with the military-industrial complex perpetuating endless wars?
I think they profit from war.
These are all such contradictory forces, aren't they?
So did Mr. Nobel. And then with guilt, he created the Nobel Peace Prize. But you could easily say that the same amount of guilt could apply to other companies. You could have the Raytheon Nobel, the Raytheon or Boeing Peace Prize.
Give it 100 years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to, when you say Wilsonian or I don't like labels.
I think I referred to you as a McCainian.
Yeah, so I like John McCain, and when he ran for president, of course, he ran against Obama, who was unbeatable at the time, and I like Barack Obama as well, but I don't think that Barack Obama shared McCain's global vision, which was more forcefully in favor of democracy. And President Obama himself recently expressed, I think, what I understood to be regret for him not having spoken out more forcefully, more vocally back when there were protests against the Iranian regime. Nobody could understand why he didn't, make a strong public statement of support for the Iranian people, a huge majority of whom do not want to live under this regime. And that is not something I'm inventing, and unfortunately we don't have any polls, but anyone you speak to that has any knowledge of Iran will of course say that they hate the morality police, they hate the Basij, and the Revolutionary Guards. Well, they run the country like a mafia.
Okay, so this has been great, man. I mean, we've created like an arc in your history up until this moment, and the publishing of your article, which is going to be promoted online with this interview. But what's the future hold for Michael Soussan? I mean, what are you into now? What's your next big thing?
Well, I think I've written enough in the screenplay department that I could spend the rest of my life selling part of it. But you never know. I'm currently in development on a very interesting project with Spike Lee, but I can't speak more to that right now. It's a very opaque industry, Hollywood, and I'm planning to focus more on the evolving nature of influence as a topic that I think has been understudied. And so I'm looking at trying to understand the mechanics of it. Now that we've made the transition to a digital world, a lot of information is available online, and with the recent sort of arrival of ChatGPT on the scene, we realized that there is a machine that can use Google and actually make sense of it, make judgments, and create text, visuals, all sorts of things. So we're very impressed by it, but of course it wouldn't exist without Google. But Google has essentially created what Jung would have referred to as a global consciousness.
Yeah, I agree. That artificial intelligence to me seems more like collective intelligence. If it's accessing a repository of information from everybody, then that's I mean, Zach Rogers, who's written for this and the guest editor of the Prior magazine, he'd balk at the idea of calling this stuff artificial intelligence. He'd call it plagiarism technology.
Yes.
So he has a totally...
But it is. I mean, artificial intelligence, we love artificial intelligence, well, or we revere it somehow in our public discourse, but talk about artificial people and suddenly people react differently. And yet it's people who are feeding the algorithms into the machines that are going to make all these judgment calls. Now, I'm with Elon Musk when it comes to being very clear about the dangers we face once quantum technology is applied to artificial intelligence, if we empower this intelligence with mechanical means, the means of mechanical movement. I think as long as it stays on a computer screen, it's one thing. And that, I think, is still the priority for us to deal with right now. Seeing that a former reality TV show host could rise to the presidency of the United States with zero experience in government, a very limited understanding of American history. He thought Frederick Douglass was still alive, for example, and being very popular right now or something. Someone had briefed him, and no, I think it's dangerous. I mean, the stupidity of the man is dangerous. But intelligence does not guarantee good government either. Obama was very intelligent. Bush Sr. Was perhaps on the pure intelligence scale higher up than his son, but his son was certainly surrounded by quite a few rather intelligent people, and yet they all make mistakes. So that's okay. I understand that you don't have to be. But what concerns me is that that huge divide that has been created between people that will just believe that truth can be, invented, and then propagated and made into dogma, and those who believe that truth has to be based on some kind of facts. Unfortunately, right now, the one of the two parties in the United States, and this is not only me saying it, it's also people like Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney, other people who have been Republican for their entire lives. They say their party is no longer what it used to be, and that most people in their party do not really believe in the Constitution if they're prepared to vote for Donald Trump once again, since he never conceded the last election. It was embarrassing the way he left Washington. He didn't even have the normal briefing meeting with his. I mean, come on, but it seems that the guy had no limits, because he understood something very interesting, which is that clicks have become currency. They have become votes because they give visibility. So the more outrageous he was, the more clicks he would get, the more coverage he would get in the news, the more visibility. And out of those clicks, he made lemonade. He basically blasted every other competitor out of the ring for the primary of the Republican Party. And then he had a natural advantage against Hillary in terms of she seemed like the establishment, and he seemed like the new guy, and a protest vote also. And I think a lot of Americans that don't live in cities feel dejected. They feel forgotten, was the word I think he used very smartly, by the establishment, who go from Davos to the Clinton Global Initiative and so on. And this is, of course, the establishment that I know very well and that I deal with on a regular basis. And it is not their fault. But they should be aware that if they seek the voters, they're going to have to play with the unfortunate reality that clicks are now more important in the lead up to an election than any poll. We don't know how to make good polls anymore. We don't know how to predict the outcome of elections. And the rise of right-wing parties in Europe is another problem that we don't know how to deal with.
It's funny, isn't it, that political power right on the back, or it's a product of wealth in the United States, but now it's becoming a product of clicks.
Yeah, I mean, it's
know.
always been most American presidents, other than I guess Obama, were extremely wealthy, and had played with the elites very. I mean, you basically don't become president of the United States unless Goldman Sachs says yes, approves.
But now it's whether or not some influencers approve.
Well, influencers. I mean, I think, there's an echo effect, and there's people that are echoing. But for example, who's QAnon?
You don't know who QAnon is?
Who is QAnon?
I don't know. Okay.
So obviously, I take Q to mean quantum, and
Is that what it means?
No, but I've decided that quantum influence is the problem where we're not able to deal with, which is the type of influence that sort of spreads exponentially through the web, creating new realities in the minds of people that cause them to vote a certain way. Unfortunately, spreading fear is a very potent, very powerful way to influence people. And so when I see how easily conspiracy theories and fear-mongering tactics spread online, then I see a threat to democracy. And let's not forget that when Germany elected or gave Hitler enough votes to form a government, I think he scored in the 33 or something, but people can fact check that, but not more than 30%. So I mean, little more than 30%. Germany at the time was the most advanced country in the world. Its democracy had survived the Great Depression, which in Germany was extreme poverty. It had survived that era, and it had the best scientists in the world, which is why both the Americans and the Soviets were so eager to steal them very quickly as they invaded Germany. And the head of the U.S. space program was a German scientist formerly working for the Nazis. So yes, no, I think if it can happen there, I think the lesson is not the Germans are bad. The lesson is that if it can happen in the most scientifically at least advanced and industrially advanced country in the world, it can happen at any time if we're not careful, if we don't fight for the values we believe in, and at some level, if we have to fight for truth, then so be it. But nobody holds all truth for all time. We know that it's an evolving thing. So in those waters is where I intend to swim and to hopefully share some insights that will help us. Because people have been in a lot of organizations that I've talked to in the last few years have been telling me, Michael, when are you gonna stop writing screenplays and get back in the game? And the truth is that I also believe that films and art in general, performances like Hamilton in New York, I mean, art has a huge effect on our culture and on our predisposition towards certain ideas. It can spread tolerance. I firmly believe that the arts are sometimes the only place where freedom of expression truly exists. Comedians are, in fact, saving, freedom of expression in America, both from the incredible conspiracies of Trump's base, which I think they have a name that really suits them, MAGA. Gaga MAGA works very well for me. But also within, in the woke community on the liberal left, we also have a problem, because you can't have an honest debate about anything anymore. People are even afraid of what words to use. And I understand that language evolves. I think it's important. It comes from a good place, but it has to be in pursuit of tolerance, greater tolerance. And you cannot fight intolerance with intolerance only. It's either a principle you believe in, free speech, or it's not. So the fight is between people that exercise free speech for different purposes.
Well, there's never been a bigger abundance of free speech, in a sense that people have more access to megaphoning their voice than what they do today. So in that thread, what do you think of open source intelligence?
Well, I'm very interested in it because first of all, let's maybe enlighten people to the fact that during the Cold War, the CIA has admitted during the Cold War, 70% of what they would consider intelligence collection would today, because of the internet, considered open source intelligence gathering and analysis. As a result of this admission, and shortly after 9/11, the U.S. intelligence community established, I think under the CIA directorate, an open source intelligence unit, so that other types of intelligence, including human intelligence, that's spies, and signals intelligence, that's whatever listening devices you can whatever reaping you can information reaping you can exercise through mechanical or technological means. There's a few more categories, but open source intelligence is now basically in the Ukraine war showing itself to be critical to understanding the reality on the ground. It's clearing a lot of the fog of war that otherwise exists when the media depends only on what governments are telling them, because it's too dangerous to be on the ground without government protection or without the troops. So in the first Gulf War, for example, there was a lot of journalists, but they were embedded with troops. Now, the experience with Navalny, for example, and which highlighted the power of several open source intelligence gathering outfits, including sorry, I'm forgetting the name, but famously the CNN collaborated with. We had never heard of it before, but it was Bellingcat. And Bellingcat is an incredible organization, which is not funded by a given state that we know of, and has basically traced the people who put the poison in Navalny's underwear back to their apartments. They have traced their through flight manifests, which is maybe not entirely open source, but gray area. But our ability today to get a clear count of how many tanks are lost on the battlefield in Ukraine by each side is provided to us by a website that even the CIA consults. It's Onyx or Oryx. And so we're living in a world where I think the fight back against conspiracy theories is going to be through the propagation of relevant open source intelligence that has been verified. So the great thing about open source intelligence is that everybody gets to verify it. If somebody says a photo is geolocated, well, somebody can go and check whether that adds up. And we have the technology now to basically geolocate most pictures that show a background. And we have the incredible technologies available to us. Gathering this, a lot of nonprofit organizations are gathering open source intelligence that is used by the media to inform the public. So I'd like to create maybe what could be a direct access line, a place that would gather a lot of these sort of be a gateway, if you will, to the open source intelligence organizations that are credible, because one has to exercise one's own judgment on what is credible. And I think that could be a great sort of added value.
Well, it sounds like the future.
Well, we'll see. I don't know how the business model would work, but I might have to work on something else to make money while pushing this. But certainly, I think there's interest in this kind of endeavor, especially at a time when people are just, if America does not know its right hand from its left, and we all depend on that country to function, then maybe the initiatives can come from other countries, including the one we're sitting in right now in Norway, where one can have a free, open debate without people necessarily calling you this or calling you that, or having to identify with a party. And yeah.
Okay, Michael. Well, I reckon we've done 120 for 1 hour and 25 minutes, which is pretty good.
Well,
I think it might be the longest podcast I've done so far. The first one of the new series. So listen, man, thanks so much. You're a good friend. I got to know you, and it's
likewise.
Thank you for contributing to the magazine and enhancing its prestige and everything, and for doing this first podcast. So it's an honor and a pleasure, and thanks, mate.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure
to be on.
The last thing is that obviously people that see this are going to want to know where to find you. So what are your social media tags?
Oh, my michaelsoussan.com, my website is probably the best gateway, but people can just Google me or, but it's, the messages I receive through my website, I always answer.
Yep.
And on LinkedIn, of course, and Facebook and all that. I mostly use it professionally, so. But I'm, easy to contact if you go through my website. It's not a problem. A lot of students, a lot of potential whistleblowers, people who need advice. Typically, whistleblowers, they're young. They're in that age where they can still afford to rock the boat, and sometimes they need to be advised to. Do you have another job, or do you have another, take care of yourself first, But I appreciate the fact that a lot of young people are reaching out and asking me for advice, and quite often I'm able to find time to give it. So that's a very rewarding part of, doing public